What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. You're watching Gunplay TV, and today we've got another comparison, this time between two Micro-Subcompacts, the Sig P365 and the Taurus GX4. Alright, so before we go any further, I'd ask that if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit the pause button now. Scroll down, take a look for that subscribe button, and once you've found it, go ahead and give that a click for me. I do appreciate it. And without further ado, let's get straight into the video.
Reach for the sky.
Alright guys, so like I said in the introduction, we've got two Micro-Subcompacts here on the table. The P365, of course, is from Sig Sauer, and the GX4 here on the right is a relatively newer option. If you haven't already, look up for the top. I've got a video on this same firearm. Okay, and this one is from Taurus. I'd say that these are two compelling options in their category, particularly for different reasons, depending on, of course, who you ask. I would say that the P365 is kind of what kicked off this whole Micro-Subcompact revival, if you will, back in 2018 when they came out on the market, and they offered this same firearm, of course, with a 10-round flesh fit magazine right out of the gate, okay? And so to get that many rounds, and again, that's about an inch thick, maybe about 4 inches tall, and of course we'll get into the specifications here in a bit, it was pretty compelling. And so it kicked off something of a revival, kind of as I was saying before, and we have seen an influx of similar spec'd firearms from different manufacturers, and I would say that this is the closest thing that Taurus has come with to date. Okay, and so again, as I was saying, the GX4, relatively new to the market, but again, you'll notice that, well, more or less the exact same specifications as far as dimension. Okay, and so we'll get into some of the differences between these two firearms, and I'll allow you to develop an opinion of what you think might be the more compelling option, and of course which one you might be inclined to go with, but I will give you my selection here at the end of the video. Stand by. Alright, so let's kick it off with features. Alright, so high level features right out of the box. The first thing that I will say is, let's go Braves. Being from Atlanta, that was a major win for us. MLB World Champions. Happy to see the Braves take it home. But all that out of the way, features, what do these guns come with out of the box? Okay, and so of course these things can be modified. There are different varieties, particularly from Sig Sauer. We'll get into that. These are kind of the base level models from, of course, both manufacturers, and we'll compare them as they come out of the box. It just so happens that I have not modified this P365 in any way, shape, or form, and of course this GX4 is still in its stock formation, if you will. So features right out of the box, I'll start with the Sig Sauer. Well, we'll just say it's lightweight, right? And this kind of applies to both guns in this category. They're going to be lightweight. They're going to be easy to conceal. The Sig Sauer, of course, like I mentioned, is kind of the industry standard, if you will, kind of the gun that everybody has accepted as the new form factor. And, you know, that's what you see Kimber and Ruger and Smith & Wesson and Springfield making their variety of a firearm that is more or less that footprint. So I would say that some of what you're getting, of course, with the Sig is the Sig name. Now, another plus out of the box with the Sig, and we'll get into this here in a bit, is that it does come with night sights right out of the box, and that is of course probably $100 value, if not more, depending on where you're buying your sights. It's just nice to get something like that out of the box. Okay, another plus with the Sig that I would say, or a feature, is of course going to be that aftermarket or first party aftermarket support for that firearm. Okay, so you are going to get a variety of frames and frame options in different colors and different etching patterns and things of that nature from the Sig Sauer first party website. In addition to that, it's not quite as modular, I'd say, as the Sig P320, but the 365 does have a removable FCU or fire control unit, and you can swap that out with different triggers, maybe into different frames, and make this accommodate different carry styles. So there's that. Moving on to the Taurus, one thing that you do get right out of the box is going to be a flat face trigger. They call it their serrated trigger, and you know, depending on who you ask, you will get feedback that says that a flat face trigger allows for more control, a more consistent trigger pull. So it is nice to get that right out of the box, especially from a manufacturer like Taurus. Okay, another thing with the Taurus, we'll get into this here in a bit, it's going to be the price. It's going to come in quite a bit lower than the Sig P365 here on the left. Okay, so there's that to consider as well. And so again, as I mentioned with the P365 on the left, of course, the weight, the size, the width, the concealability of this firearm is pretty much as good as it gets, and we'll get into that again here in a bit. One other thing that I do like about the Taurus, and also that we'll touch on later in the video, is that you do get the ability to kind of make the grip a little bit more your own. Okay, so features kind of summed up, I would say that the key thing with both of these firearms, and I'd give them both equal points in this category, but the key thing that I would say is that they are all going to be kind of that pseudo double stack, very small style magazine that kind of enables this category to exist, in the sense that we get 10, 11, 12, 13 rounds depending on which firearm from which manufacturer and which magazine you're carrying in such a small firearm body. It's pretty impressive. Okay, so moving on to sights. As I touched on in the introduction, with the P365 here, you do get the Sig X-ray day-night sights, and so I'll try to arrange that to where it can be seen in the camera, but it is nice in the sense that you do get a very bright tritium front sight with again a bright yellow or a bright green, neon green I'd say, surround there around that. Very nice to have that right out the box. Now moving on to the rear sights, I would say that you get a serrated rear with black surround tritium inserts there. So it's pretty nice right out the box. You know, I haven't felt the need to upgrade these in any way, provided that I don't get this milled for a red dot, okay? And so that's something we'll get into here in a bit, but neither of these firearms are optic ready in this variety now. Of course with the Sig and also with the Taurus as time progresses, but currently with the Sig there are a ton of different varieties and formations that you can buy this firearm in, and I'll try to roll some of them in on the screen. But again, as far as the stock formation goes, it does come with the X-ray night sights right out the box, but it is not optic ready. Now moving on to the Taurus, I will say that you do get some steel sights, which is nice, but they are simple. You get a white dot front and a black serrated rear, okay? And so, you know, it's a relatively simple, relatively basic sight formation or sight arrangement, but it isn't the worst. Again, it's high contrast, which I do like. I do personally prefer, if I'm gonna have a high contrast or maybe just a white dot up front, I like that it does come with a all black serrated rear. It makes it easier to pick that up instead of having additional white dots here in the back. So I do like that. But one thing I will mention, and I mentioned this in my review of this particular firearm, when I received it from Taurus, it did have the sights out of alignment. Right, they were kind of hanging out to the left of the firearm body there. That's probably not something that you're going to see all the time, but it did happen with mine. Of course, once I slap those back into alignment, it's shooting true. I haven't had any issues with those, but I am happy that they are at least steel out of the box, but not quite as nice as the X-ray sights on the P365. So moving on to yet another category that I like to include in all of my videos, not because it's typically overlooked, but it's something that I try not to overlook when I'm picking up a new firearm, and that's going to be the slide release, right? It's something that you should interface with quite often if you're doing safety checks, you know, of course you're using your firearm in training, right? So I will say that both the slide releases are pretty pronounced. I'll try to hold them vertically here, and hopefully we get a good look at those and which one kind of sticks out from the body more. I do like what Taurus has done here with kind of having provided shielding or you know, raised polymer around each side of that slide release, as opposed to just having it here on the bottom on the P365. Again, not a huge deal, but let's just go ahead and test those. So the Sig, the P365 slide release there, of course I'm doing these on an empty mag, so not quite the same as if I had a loaded one in here. But I will say on an empty mag, that Taurus GX4 is quite a bit easier to drop. Now that might be because the spring tension in the magazine may be less than it is on the Sig, but I will note that I have got a lot more rounds through this P365 and it's still a little stiffer on an empty mag. Take that for what you want and what you will, but again, I just wanted to call that out. As far as mag releases though, they do both come with a pretty nice one out the box. I don't think there's really anything left to be desired. They're not too low profile and they're not too stiff like you might find on a Smith & Wesson Shield. All right, so moving on to ergonomics and grip. So yet another category here, at least in my opinion, this one's probably one of the most important when it comes to looking for a micro-subcompact, at least for me, because these guns are so small, it's important to have a good sense of ergonomics and controllability about the gun, right? So one thing I will note right out the box, they are pretty similar in size, and we'll get into that here in the next category. But one thing I do want to point out about the two of these, the Taurus does come with interchangeable back straps. So that's something of another feature that I alluded to in the introduction. You can kind of customize this to make it your own and maybe, you know, fill some of that gap in the ergonomics that you might find out of the box. But it is nice to have that included when you do purchase the firearm, as opposed to on the P365, you pretty much just get the one size grip. Now, of course, as I mentioned before, the P365 does have a shit ton a variety. Of course, you can go with the P365 XL. You can do something so simple as going out and getting yourself an extended 12-round magazine, getting yourself an additional 2 rounds, plus a bit of a pinky grip there. So that's kind of nice. You get yourself an extended grip, but of course, that same option is available for the GX4. So that's not quite what I'd call a feature. And I'd have to give the edge to the Taurus for having that expandable or adjustable backstrap option right out the box. Okay, but as far as gripping them, I will say that the Sig does feel a bit slimmer in the hand. I do like that it's got this kind of undercut there to help you get as high as possible on that firearm, but it is very pointable. If you shoot a Sig P365, I'm sorry, a P320, I think you'll find this very, very natural. For me, you know, Sig kind of being my home platform, if you will. I do like the P365's pointability and ergonomics. But what Taurus has done here is something very simple. I do wish that undercut was a bit higher there. But as far as how this grips and how it points very natural, very similar. This kind of sculpting here on the rear backstrap is quite a bit different, and we can kind of see that there. If I hold them upright, I feel like you get quite a bit more under the gun, but then you've got this kind of camelback backstrap, if you will, that does fill the palm quite nicely. So I don't know, they both do feel pretty good, but I'll say that the Taurus, you know, having that adjustable backstrap option, which of course this is the standard one that's installed, it does feel pretty good. The grip texture on both is very similar, but I'd say that the Taurus is a bit more aggressive. Of course, I've carried this P365 quite a bit, so maybe it's worn down some, but the Taurus does feel to be a bit more like some grip tape as opposed to this very even but pretty aggressive texture on the Sig P365. All right, and so I mentioned that we get into size and weight next. Okay, this is kind of where this category is defined, right? The size and dimensions of these firearms are what makes them so concealable. That's more or less what the allure is behind these, right? We all know that it's not easier to fight with a smaller firearm. If you can have a bigger one, it's better to have a bigger one in most cases. But what I'll say is, for concealability, there's nothing really better than having a small firearm with the capability, right? The same round, a 9mm round, in a magazine that allows you to carry a reasonable amount of ammunition, okay? And so both of these, I'll go ahead and say, are a 10-round magazine right out the box. It's nice to have that type of capability, right? Neither here nor there. The size and weight category right out the box, kicking it off with weight, the Sig is coming in at 17.8 ounces, so right at 500 grams for the Sig, and the Taurus is just a bit chunkier over here at 18.5 ounces. So again, I have to give the edge to the Sig as far as weight. It does feel quite a bit more slimline, even as you pick them up. There's that, okay? So as far as height goes, the Sig is coming in at 4.3, the Taurus at 4.4. So they're more or less indistinguishable. I'd say if I put them on top of each other, you probably aren't going to notice the difference in height there. They're pretty much exactly the same. Also, I'd say in width, the Sig is coming in width at 1.06 inches, and the Taurus is coming in at 1.08 inches. So again, slightly chunkier for the Taurus, but if I put them on top of each other there, again, you're probably gonna have a hard time telling me which one is thicker. It could be something so simple as the mag release or the slide release, but they're more or less the same in that category as well. And even in length, right, the Sig is coming in at 5.8 and the Taurus is coming in also at 5.8, but of course, depending on which backstrap you're using there, you could have it out to at least, or up to, I'd say, 6.05 inches. So more or less the exact same length out of the box, but of course, if you do swap that backstrap, you get a little bit more length out of the Taurus. If that's a plus for you, a minus, you determine. Next up, I would typically talk about takedown, but of course YouTube has recently changed their policies, and so we're not going to get into takedown. We won't go through that process. The manuals will go through that justifiably for you when you pick these up, but instead I'll talk of materials, right? We'll talk of the composition, right? So let's kick it off first with barrels, all right? So I'll kind of pull these slides back. We'll see that both these guns are empty, as we've already established, of course, and we can kind of see the barrels poking out the front there. So with the Sig Sauer, we do get a 3.1-inch barrel. It's carbon steel according to Sig, okay? But there's no talk of which finish or which type of finish they put on it. But all in all, it's a pretty good barrel. It's a Sig barrel. It's very accurate in my experience, and I've had no issues with it. All right, so on to the Taurus, you do get a 3.06-inch barrel. Okay, so slightly shorter than the Sig, but it's satin black DLC coated. So Taurus isn't playing around with the coatings. Right out the box to get that, that's pretty nice, but it's a stainless steel barrel as opposed to the carbon steel. Okay, so I think that that's where maybe some of the cost savings are, but you determine if that's going to be a major determinant in which one you pick up. Again, still kind of keeping into that category of materials, we'll talk of the frame. Now, naturally, looking at these, you can tell that they're both going to be a polymer frame right out the box, but the internal frame, of course, the rails on which your slide is riding, is going to be typically a metal of some kind, right? And so with the Sig Sauer, it's going to be a stainless steel internal frame. And of course with the Taurus as well, stainless steel. But one thing I'll point out with the Taurus, and I'm not sure we'll be able to see it here without taking the gun down on camera, but you do get kind of a satin finish on the frame on the inside. I like that. It's probably not as slick as the shinier finish that you get in the P365. This is probably more reliable what you get in the P365. But again, I do like just that it's satin. It looks nice. They did the same thing on the barrel, which you can kind of see there. But you determine if that's something that's a big deal for you. But aesthetically, all that satin finish that they've kind of done throughout the internals of this GX4, very nice, very tasteful, and I like the look of it. Continuing into that talk of materials, right? Triggers. This is kind of a key component in the composition of the firearm. You do get, of course, a metal trigger on the P365. It's going to be a polymer trigger on the GX4. But the difference being, well, the key difference, of course, is going to be the pull weight and going to be the shape, of course, right? And so with the Sig, it's going to be a curved trigger, all right? And so I personally have no issues with this trigger. It reminds me of the stock P320 trigger that used to come with the earlier P320s. I think a lot of them come with a flat face now. I think all the FCUs come with a flat face trigger now, but this is very reminiscent of that early one. The pull weight is very comfortable for me, and again, you know, it's all in all not a very bad trigger, but it is a curved trigger. If that's something that, you know, makes or break the purchase, that's something to consider, right? Of course, you can get different FCUs, different varieties with the P365, but this kind of stock version, the stock variety that we've got here, of course, does or did at least come with the curved face trigger. Now, the GX4, a little different there, right? We see that we've got this kind of blade safety installed or built into the trigger there, but of course it is going to be a polymer trigger. One thing that I wanted to point out, and I pointed this out in my review as well, we'll note that as I touch that trigger blade safety, it's not retracted or it hasn't kind of represented itself in any way since I've kind of pressed that down. Now, I haven't seen that work its way out as I've continued to use the firearm, but so let that say what it will. This is a very early unit, so that could be part of it. All right, but as far as the trigger on this, it is very crisp. The pull weight, I'd say, is a little bit more than it is on that P365, but there is very little creep on this. I mean, it pretty much just breaks. And for a Taurus trigger, I'm very impressed with that. With the P365, you do have quite a bit more travel, a little bit of creep, and then the break. So as far as triggers, again, I'll let you guys pick these up in person and check it out. I'm very comfortable with both, but I think that this one's a little bit more crisp, a little bit less travel there, but I don't like that it's a polymer trigger. I'm not a fan of these trigger blades, and this one doesn't seem to work in the first place, so let that say what it will. So yet another crucial category coming up here, which is going to be looks and aesthetics. Okay, so that's of course going to be paramount if you're anything like me, right? I like my guns to look good as well as operate good. Okay, and so for me, I pick up this Sig P365, and it's a very classily designed firearm. It's very sleek. We can see that they've kind of considered the fact that it's going to be concealed carry. These bevels all around there, I imagine at least, are intended to reduce snag. And of course, as I mentioned before, there are a ton of varieties of this firearm, some that are even further considered in that sense to reduce snag, and they don't even have top sights. Either here nor there, I think that the Sig P365 looks very good out the box. The Taurus, not so bad, but it is a lot more brutish, I'd say, in its design, in keeping with that Taurus G family lineup. And again, I'm not a huge fan of the design, but the same considerations are in place here with the bevels around the frame to hopefully reduce as much snag as possible, being as this is going to be a concealed carry firearm and potentially be under your shirt, in your bag, someplace where it could potentially be snagged on retrieval when you don't want that to happen. Okay, so all the design considerations I think are there, but aesthetically, I mean, that Sig is just a lot better looking of a firearm, I think, from pretty much every angle. But again, looks, of course, are going to be subjective, and I'll allow you to form your own opinion, but my vote goes to the Sig. Now, of course, this is probably the most important category for everyone watching the video, and that's going to be the price, the cost to get one of these firearms, typically over the counter, right? So here we are in November of 2021, not quite the best political climate for firearms, but still you can go out and get one right now. Okay, and so a Sig P365 right now is probably going to hit you for about $500 for the base model. The Taurus, about $400 at the moment, maybe cheaper depending on where you find it. I just looked on Academy the moment before I made this video, and these are around $399. So again, much cheaper, or significantly enough cheaper to where you could walk out with maybe some upgraded sights. But again, maybe that's the reason for the cost savings in the first place between the two. But maybe about $100 cheaper, maybe slightly more for the Taurus GX4. Now, again, in closing, to do the typical cliche YouTube thing, I've got to tell you which one I would take if I could only have one. So for me, when it comes down to this kind of final selection, right, it really comes down to reliability. The Taurus GX4 is a very new firearm, hard to say. I haven't had any issues with its reliability, but by and large in the industry, multiple millions of use cases, we haven't quite seen it. The P365 has been there for quite a while. Sig has kind of this thing with recalls, but they tend to get it right either the first or second time. I haven't had any issues with my P365 as far as reliability goes. I run it anytime I need to be low profile. Any other time I'm probably carrying my Glock, but it's been great. I'd probably go with the P365 personally if I only had to have one. It looks better, like I said, and at least in my opinion. It's a Sig, which I'm just a Sig guy. I'm partial. Sorry, but of course my reviews naturally, as we know, are impartial, guys. But I would go with the Sig, just being myself. I like it a little bit more. I wish that it had a flat face trigger. Of course, that's something that you got to drop in, and Sig is going to charge you a bit extra to get something like that. But I like that it comes with the night sights out of the box, the high contrast front. It's just, to me, it's a great bargain. But I'll let you be the selector. Ultimately, you're going to spend your own dollars. Okay, so with all that being said, y'all, I'm gonna go ahead and get up out of here. Let me know if there's anything else that you guys like to see from the channel, any other comparisons that you like to see. I like this kind of format, and it seems that you guys also kind of like this type of format. When I come in and I compare the two firearms. So I'd like to get more of those across the table, hopefully work with some OEMs and manufacturers and make that happen, but I can't do that without you guys, and so I want to thank you guys for watching this video. If you've made it this far, again, and somehow you haven't subscribed, go ahead and scroll down and hit that subscribe button for me. I do appreciate it. Leave a comment for the algorithm, hit the like button for me. With all that being said, I'm gone. I am pleased to see the Braves taking home. So again, go Braves. Let's go Brandon.